Howdy everyone, and today I'm giving you all a review which might not be watched by many people at all, as this is actually one of Canon's least popular and least sold lenses, the Canon EF 20mm f2.8 USM. It's designed for full-frame or APS-C digital SLR cameras, and will also work with mirrorless cameras if you have a special adapter. It originally came out all the way back in 1992, so it was clearly intended to be a small, ultra-wide angle lens for 35mm film cameras, which was also somewhat affordable, although even nowadays it costs around £400 or over $500 US, so it's hardly cheap. If you own an APS-C camera, then there isn't much point to this lens. Just get a nice image-stabilized 17 to 50mm f2.8 lens instead, or even better, the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8. But this lens could still make sense if you own a full-frame digital camera. The 20mm focal length is nice and useful and dramatic. However, there are other full-frame options made by Sigma, notably their 20mm f1.8 and recent f1.4 lens, both of which let in far more light and can give you far more out-of-focus backgrounds. Still, this Canon lens seems to have a good reputation, so someone out there somewhere might be interested in it. Let's take a look. It weighs about 400 grams, so it's not a total lightweight, and it's not very big, with a 72mm filter thread. That makes it a little bit smaller and lighter than an ultra-wide angle zoom lens for full-frame cameras. It's made of plastics, but the build quality feels nice and solid enough. The lens uses one of Canon's USM autofocus motors. It's very fast to focus and very quiet, and nice and accurate too. And you can turn that focus ring whenever you like for full-time manual focusing. The front element doesn't extend or rotate, so using filters is no problem at all. All in all, this lens is a good size and it has lovely build quality, being very snappy and easy to use. Alright, let's see about image quality then. Firstly, on a full-frame camera, a 20MP Canon 6D. Peripheral illumination and chromatic aberration correction are turned on. At f2.8, the image is nice and sharp in the middle. Over in the corners, we're definitely seeing softness, but any chromatic aberration has been taken care of nicely by the camera. Vignetting must be pretty bad though. You can see a real degradation in image quality at f2.8 as the camera boosts the light levels in the corners. Stop down to f4 for a small improvement in sharpness there. At f5.6 the corners look fairly good now, and at f8 they look very sharp indeed. f11 is just as good. So on full frame the lens performs acceptably well, although it's a bit of a shame you have to stop it down so much to get sharp corners. Well, let's see how the lens performs on a torture ground of a 24MP APS-C camera. I've adapted it onto my Canon EOS M3 to find out. At f2.8 we're getting some fairly good resolution in the middle, but also a bit of ghosting and quite noticeable purple fringing. Image quality over in the corners is really very soft. At f4, there's no improvement in the corners apart from some more contrast, but over in the middle of the image, sharpness is very good. Stop down to f5.6 for another tiny improvement in the middle of the image, but surprisingly, the corners are still pretty bad. At f8, there's a bit more clarity, but even at f11, there's no further improvement. So this old lens from 1992 is not appropriate for use on a modern APS-C digital camera, so if you're not working on full frame, you should really forget it. Okay, let's look at distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. As for distortion, well, there's some barrel distortion. The good news is that it's not very strong, certainly not as strong as you'd see on a zoom lens, but the bad news is that it falls in a gentle but unusual moustache pattern, which might end up being a bit tricky to correct. At f2.8 we see very dark corners. Stop down to f4 and that darkness is pushed right into the edges, and at f5.6 it's all gone. You should certainly use peripheral illumination on your camera with this lens though. The lens can focus as closely as 25cm, which is useful enough. Happily, the close-up image quality is very sharp, even from f2.8. Let's see now how the lens works against bright lights. The answer is poorly, with plenty of colourful flaring and a major loss of contrast. Not surprising for an older lens, but considering its wide angle, that is rather a problem, as the sun will glint into your pictures quite often. Finally, bokeh. This lens renders out-of-focus backgrounds in a way that's pretty busy and distracting, so it's a black mark there. Overall, if you're using a full-frame camera, there are a few things to like about this lens. It gets very sharp images in the middle of your pictures, although you'll have to stop down for the sharpest corners. It's quite light and not very big, it handles well, there's not too much distortion, and I love that 20mm field of view on full frame. It's dramatic while still being easy to shoot. But at £400, the lens is far too expensive. I think most full-frame camera owners would be more inclined to save up for an ultra-wide-angle zoom lens, or a nice Sigma 20mm f1.8 or f1.4 lens instead, which would be a lot more exciting to use. Still, the Canon 20mm f2.8 USM remains a very pleasant and useful lens for full-frame camera owners, just don't expect any fireworks from it.